I will be showing you my personal methods on how I propagate hardwood fruit tree cuttings. Today we'll be propagating fig tree cuttings and peach tree cuttings. So let's not waste time and get straight into it. So before we get started, let me just give you a preview of what the end product's going to look like. I use regular plastic bags that I fill with my homemade compost. I like using this method because it's cheap and you can see the roots develop through the transparent bag. Twist the plastic around the base of the whatever you cloned, and then you can just fold it over the sides. Then you've got a nice moisture lock, so it's going to help keep the humidity inside quite constant, and you can easily poke holes into the bottom. It's just one of the methods I decided to use because I've got an excess of this available. So supplies you will need to make your cuttings, obviously, is you're going to need some cuttings. You're going to need something that you're going to use as a container. In this case I'm using the plastic bags. Your medium in which you are going to put in your cuttings. I'm going to use a sharp knife and some hedge trimmers. These are blunt, don't recommend it, but that's what I've got. And then optional rooting hormone. I use number 2 rooting hormone. It's optional, you don't need it, you can get by without it. I've cloned many plants without rooting hormone, but I figured I don't always want to wait so long, so let's speed things up a bit, and I'm going to be using the rooting hormone today. Brand doesn't really matter. More importantly, you will need to see if it's for softwood cuttings, hardwood cuttings, and decide on the type of plant that you're going to be propagating, which rooting strength you're going to be needing. So first off, we're going to inspect our cutting, and for us to know where to cut, so for us to understand and give our clones the best chance of surviving, we need to understand what mechanisms the plant used to actually establish the roots and to get this plant going. Roots usually develop strongest at your node points. You can see there. And another thing that you should know is that the roots form from the cambium layer just between the bark and the wood stock. Damaging or skimming your plant's comes from is to expose the cambium layer so there is more of the part of the plant that is responsible for rooting is exposed to the rooting hormone and the media that you are going to be transplanting in. So the first thing that you want to be looking at when you take your cuttings from the tree is what is the age of the specific shoots that you are targeting, and what age should they be? Well, the common consensus is that anything that's 1 year to 2 years, within the last year to 2 years, the growth of the plant, that's the section that you want to be using to make your cuttings from. When you are propagating peach tree, you generally want to have a slightly bigger, longer cutting, as they will take significantly longer to root. And the best time to take your cuttings is during your periods of rest. So during fall and winter, these specific cuttings that I've got are taken a bit late. They were taken during the last 4 weeks of our winter. Here's an example of what the new growth and the old growth looks like. So this section here is 3 years old growth. This section here is 2 years, and because it was such a long shoot, the top section with the last year's growth, I just chopped it off, and I'll be using that to make another one. So what I like to do is I'd like to find sections that have nodes close to each other, and then at the base of the node I skim the outer bark until you reach the cambium layer, and I do this from the first node to the bottom, and then usually on the opposite side higher there's another node, and then from the base of that node I skin all the way down as well, making sure to just make it to the cambium layer and not all the way through to the wood. Just like that. So how do you know what sections of your cuttings to use, and how do you know what sections on the tree that you need to cut that's going to give you the best success rate for your cuttings? So the answer to that is it's very plant specific, or groups of plants specific. In this case, where we're doing semi-hardwood and hardwood cuttings for fruit trees, when making peach tree cuttings, I generally try to make them a bit longer, between 20 to 25 centimeters long, and then also depending on if I'm going to be able to make a second one from the same shoot, will also help me decide where I want to end my my first cutting. So I'm gonna be using this as my rooting zone, and I will be cutting this one right there, just above, about a centimeter above the last node. We're gonna have 3 healthy nodes above soil, and we're gonna have 1, 2, 3 nodes that's gonna be below soil, and we're gonna be exposing the cambium layer on each side just below the node points. So for this, I'll be exposing the cambium layer at underneath each of these node points. So at the bottom node, I just start at the bottom, and then I just gently with the knife remove the bark into the cambium layer. Just like that. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna plant the first 3 nodes plus minus 10 to 15 centimeters that I'm gonna be submerging in my potting mix, and then I'm gonna leave 2 nodes above the soil that's not gonna be covered, and I just cut it off flush about 2 centimeters above the last node. You'll see online a lot of recommendations to actually cut the top slanted and not straight. It actually does not affect the plant rooting itself or aid in the rooting process in any manner, but it does help identify which side is the top side. And if you got a few of them and they're the same thickness, it's quite easy to mistaken the wrong side as the bottom. So for that reason, that's actually the only reason there is to cut it slanted at the top. Some people cut it slanted at the bottom. The reason for that is it exposes more cambium layer. I'm just going to put that in the water for now so that it does not dry out. Then I am going to fill my bag with my potting mix. Just so that everything is more or less equal, I like to add 6 just so the volumes are more or less equal in all my bags. I like to add 6 of these grow cups, and I just use that to measure the soil. There's no other reason. It just helps me keep the watering and the humidity even throughout my projects, so that I've got a idea of how much water to add. So what I do next is I just go and I compact the soil a bit. The reason I compact it is when you put in your cutting, you want to have as much of the media inside in contact with the surface area on the cutting itself. So it helps with the moisture absorption so that the cutting firstly doesn't dry out, and also that there's maximum exposure of the cambium layer exposing to the minerals in your media. That's actually gonna help establish the roots. So what I do next is punch a hole first before you dip your clone in the rooting powder, otherwise it's sort of clumsy and then you've got a clone in your hand and it's just uncomfortable. So what I like to do is I just stick it in all the way to the bottom. I wet my cutting so that the rooting powder sticks easy. I just dip it in the powder itself and I give it a bit of a tap. The excess that falls off. I stick it all the way to the bottom and then I recompact around the cutting itself. Then what I do is, because I know the moisture level of my compost, I add a sufficient amount of water directly into, so that we can get the moisture level right, as well as get the humidity going. It may look like I added a lot of water in here, but it's actually just enough, as the compost at the moment is currently quite dry, as I've left it standing in the sun at the moment. So we're gonna rehydrate it a bit as well. And then all you do is twist your plastic around the base of your cutting and you just pull the sides over the edges, and that's that. Not too complicated, and I personally think this method works well. I've had good results in the past with it and I've got no reason to change it. I haven't had any problems using this method, and that's the basics on how I propagate my hardwood cuttings. With softwood cuttings, obviously it will be a bit different, especially with herbs and that sort of thing, where there's a lot more foliage and there's a lot less nutrients in the actual stem of the plants to maintain it. Also, your softwood cuttings tend to perspirate a lot more and you get a lot more moisture loss. That's the reason you would establish them in a dome first, where there's a higher humidity and the whole plant is submerged in the humidity. Where with this, using this method, your hardwood cuttings don't really transpire that much through this little section here. And you can see we've got some developing nodes that are on top, but they don't have foliage yet that don't perspire that much. When making peach tree cuttings, I clean up the sides a bit, even out the sides where the side shoot branches came out, and then I just like to clean them up a bit. And from here on out is just rinse and repeat. Add our compost to the bag, add our moisture to rehydrate the compost to the desired level. Then we compact the soil a bit to maximize the cambium layer exposure and contact with our potting mix to help with the absorption of moisture, to keep the cutting hydrated, as well as to keep the humidity levels inside our soil at levels that will inspire root production. Some onions that stayed behind in the compost that I harvested. You take your dowel stick, you make your hole first before you dip your cutting into the rooting hormone. Rooting hormone. What did I do with my rooting? There it is. You just dip it, you shake, you tap off any extra. It's quite a substantial amount of powder. The top section, I'm just gonna take my finger, rub it on there to make sure it's exposed as well. Yes, sanitation is important, but I'm not that nitty gritty, cry my eyes out for all this sanitary and sterile. Nature will balance itself out, especially if you use a naturally healthy soil. In this case is the compost. It's combined with my red earthworms, and the bioflora of the soil should be in balance already if you're going to use it as a potting mix. And the beneficial fungi for root establishment will be in your compost. So being sterile for me is not that big of an importance for something like this. And that's what it looks like. All that's left to do now is to make your drainage holes at the bottom, and then I'll be putting these in a shaded place, not in direct sunlight, and they may take a few months to root. Especially the peach trees, they will take a substantial time. Just something to remember, don't forget to add your drainage holes into the bottom of your bag. Now, as for fig trees, this is more than sufficient. Fig trees are very well known for rooting very easily. I will put this in a not direct sunlight until they've established, and then I'll leave the roots until I am satisfied with the amounts of roots that I see, and then I will transplant into the bigger containers where I'll keep them until they are ready to go into the soil.